The scripture reading this morning is going to be from Deuteronomy, chapter 4, verses 15 and 16. So Deuteronomy chapter 4, verses 15 and 16. Take careful heed to yourselves, for you saw no form when the Lord spoke to you at Horeb out of the midst of the fire, lest you act corruptly and make for yourselves a carved image in the form of any figure, the likeness of male or female.
We'll come back to Deuteronomy here in a second, but if you want to go to Exodus 32, I want to show a passage here to kind of set the foundation for the lesson this morning. This is after the people escaped Egypt, and they're on their way to the Promised Land. And I don't know if you remember, but at one point they thought they'd lost Moses. If you were talking to them at the time and said, well, it looks like the plan has failed, Moses has left and he hasn't come back. In fact, this ends up being one of the low points of the whole trip on the way to the Promised Land, is when they think they've lost Moses. He goes up to receive the commands, of course, the commandments from God, and it takes him a while, and that's when things end up going bad. Here's Exodus 32, verse 1. Now when the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, the people assembled about Aaron and said to him, "Come make us a god who will go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up from the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him." So it's in direct relation to the fact that they're waiting on Moses. He's not showing. And so they decide to come up with the golden calf plan. And like I say, it was one of the worst points of the trip to the Promised Land. The golden calf caused a lot of damage. But it didn't happen right away. It's not like this, "Oh, goodbye, Moses, we'll see you in a little bit," and then just started, collecting materials to make this golden calf. They waited for a while, and Moses took a long time. And during this wait, and this is what I'd like to point out this morning, during that waiting period, that's when their thinking started to kind of veer off track. It gradually headed in the wrong direction. They kind of went into their default setting of idolatry. It's almost as if that, if you left them long enough alone with their thoughts, with just their thoughts to guide them, they automatically slipped into idolatry mode. It's easy to see this whole thing, read about this and see it from a distance. Maybe it's just this interesting story that shows up in a pulpit once in a while. Worshiping golden calves, it's something primitive people do, and it's easy to miss how relevant this could be to us. How likely it is that, we think if we had been there, we might say, well, we'd have at least stood to the side and watch it. But it's important to realize that if we had been in their shoes, we probably would have been part of the same mistake. And there's some things that we can learn about ourselves, maybe taking a little bit of a look at it this morning. One thing to notice, this very thing of making an idol was specifically condemned by God. Exodus 19 talks about how he descended on Mount Sinai. It's important to remember this was not just an overcast weather system. There was an earthquake. The mountain was on fire. It was in flames. There was thick, dark smoke like from a furnace. It was not a cloudy day. It was a disruption of the reality there. It was a very frightening situation. And Moses brought the people toward this to meet God. And God started speaking directly to the people. I don't know if you're aware of this, but God started delivering the commandments to the people verbally. And in Exodus 20, verse 4, he says, during this first part, says, "You shall not make for yourself an idol." Very specific. Later on in Exodus 20, the people say, "Stop!" And they beg Moses to intercede for them. And here's why in Exodus 20, verse 19. God is speaking directly to the people. He gets a little ways, and then the people say, "Stop." And here's Exodus 20, verse 19 as to why. They say to Moses, "Speak to us yourself, and we will listen. But let not God speak to us, or we'll die." He says his voice is going to kill us. They're very afraid of just his voice. So Exodus 24, that chapter deals with how Moses wrote God's commands down, and he read them to all the people. And when all the commands are delivered to the people, The people had a deep, heartfelt reaction. If you look at Exodus 24, verse 7, here's their reaction once all this information is delivered to them. God basically says, this is what I want. And here's the reaction of the people in Exodus 24, verse 7. All that the Lord has spoken, we will do, and we will be obedient. To seal the covenant, they did something else that kind of stands out. Moses did. This is Exodus 24, verse 8. You may have not noticed this before. Exodus 24, verse 8. So Moses took the blood, it's from a sacrifice, and sprinkled it on the people, and said, behold, the blood of the covenant which the Lord has made with you in accordance with all these words. So Moses sprinkled actual blood on the people. And you would remember that day. That's got to stand out. I mean, following the incredible voice that they heard that they thought would destroy them and all the things that went along with it. And then to seal the covenant by speaking openly and say, okay, we're ready to do whatever you say. And then for blood to be involved, it would emphasize the seriousness of the situation. Everything is set up with God. The covenant's been made clear. Exclamation points made out of fire and smoke and blood. You would think that all of that would lead to a lasting impression. But then you read in Exodus 32, again, that when Moses left and enough time went by, the people made a golden calf and worshipped it. The very thing that God said not to do. And this is a very important detail I want to point out to you. I remember always thinking that, oh wow, Moses left and they started worshiping a false god. That's not what happened that day. They were worshiping the true God, but not in the right way. One thing to learn here, one of the very few things, the least you could learn here, is it matters how we worship God. That is not taught very often today. A lot of people think as long as you're sincere and there's a lot of effort behind it, that it doesn't matter how you worship God. But that's one of the biggest lessons in the Old Testament, and that's indicated here. They were worshiping God, but they were worshiping Him in a way that they preferred. Idolatry is not just about making images to false gods. It's also about making images about the true God. God commanded them to not make an image of Him, and it's emphasized later in Deuteronomy 4. If you'll read this with me, notice He's not talking about false gods. He's talking about Himself, and He's referring back to Sinai. This is Deuteronomy 4, verse 11. He's reminding him, he says, you came near and stood at the foot of the mountain, and the mountain burned with fire. Notice it's not just a cloudy day. The mountain burned with fire to the very heart of the heavens, darkness, cloud, and thick gloom. Then the Lord spoke to you from the midst of the fire. You heard the sound of words. And he points out something. He says, but you saw no form, only a voice. So back at Sinai, it's important to remember, he's saying there was fire and darkness and clouds and thick gloom. You saw the side effects of my presence, but you didn't see any particular form. And then we get back to Deuteronomy 4:15. So watch yourselves carefully, since you did not see any form on the day the Lord spoke to you at Horeb from the midst of the fire, so that you do not act corruptly and make a graven image for yourselves in the form of any figure, the likeness of male or female. He goes on to describe all kinds of options. He says, don't look at the sky, at the sun, at the stars, what I made. Don't worship creation, worship the Creator. He holds them to account in that in Romans 1 as well. So the command is kind of like this. Of course, don't make images of false gods. He says, but I don't want you to make them of me either. I made it a point to not be visible to you. Here's a question. Why? I want to pause and take you to 1 Kings 12. In class, we were talking a little bit about the stretch of time where the kingdom split into two pieces. There was the north and the south. The promised land split into two pieces. Jeroboam, he was king of the north, and he had a problem up there. In order to have any real connection with God, he and his people needed access to Jerusalem because the temple was there. But Jerusalem was in the south part, which he did not have. So Jeroboam knew this was going to be an issue, and here's how he solved it. Here's the problem. 1 Kings 12:27. So this is Jeroboam's problem. So he's got the north, but he doesn't have Jerusalem. If this people go up to offer sacrifices to the house of the Lord at Jerusalem, then the heart of this people will return to their Lord, even to Rehoboam, king of Judah, and they'll kill me and return to Rehoboam, king of Judah. So he's thinking, I'm going to lose people if I don't do something, since I don't have Jerusalem. So he made the same mistake that the people made at the foot of Sinai. He made a golden calf. In fact, this time, this guy made two. 1 Kings 12. 1 Kings 12:28. So the king consulted and made two golden calves, and he said to them, it is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Behold your gods, O Israel, that brought you up from the land of Egypt. And again, notice it's worshiping God, but with, it's not a false god, but they're worshiping God falsely. So there's one in Bethel, that's in the south part of Israel, just above Jerusalem. It's pretty close. And then there's one in Dan, the north part of Israel. And it worked. The people made the compromise. It wasn't really about pleasing God. It was about preferences. It was about convenience. By having two spots other than Jerusalem, it made God more convenient. And maybe that's one reason why God said, don't make an image of me, because an image tends to fit our preferences. What do I think God is? How do I imagine him? And then we reduce him to our imagination. An image is more about making him convenient. It tries to make him less than God. We often read about idolatry in the Bible. I'm going to read one passage. It's in Isaiah 44. It's almost sadly funny in this description. It seems pretty silly, but apparently it was a real problem. It's a major subject in the Bible. In Isaiah 44, an idolater is described in almost laughable terms. Isaiah 44, starting with verse 12. If you read with me. The man shapes iron into a cutting tool and does his work over the coals, fashioning it with hammers and working it with his strong arm. He also gets hungry and his strength fails. He drinks no water and becomes weary. Another shapes wood. He extends a measuring line. He outlines it with red chalk. He works it with planes and outlines it with a compass, and makes it like the form of a man, like the beauty of man, so that it may sit in a house. Surely he cuts cedars for himself and takes a cypress or an oak and raises it for himself among the trees of the forest. He plants a fir, and the rain makes it grow. Then it becomes something for a man to burn. So he takes one of them and warms himself. He also makes a fire to bake bread. He also makes a god and worships it. He makes it a graven image and falls down before it. Half of it he burns in the fire. Over this half he eats meat as he roasts a roast and is satisfied. He also warms himself and says, aha, I am warm. I have seen the fire. But the rest of it he makes into a god, his graven image. He falls down before it and worships. He also prays to it and says, deliver me, for you are my God. They do not know, nor do they understand, for he has smeared over their eyes so that they cannot see, and their hearts so that they cannot comprehend. No one recalls, nor is there knowledge or understanding to say, I have burned half of it in the fire, and also have baked bread over its coals. I roast meat and eat it. Then I make the rest of it into an abomination. I fall down before a block of wood. He feeds on ashes. A deceived heart has turned him aside, and he cannot deliver himself, nor say, is there not a lie in my right hand? And we read this, here in the 21st century, and it seems pretty foolish, and it is. And it's easy to look back on the people at Sinai and at Jeroboam and those people and think how backward they were, how primitive. Bowing to gold or a block of wood. Only a fool would get caught up in that sort of thing, and many fools did. But I want to point out just briefly, one of those fools was named Solomon. And that kind of got my attention, because Solomon had it together. He was very wise. Even the wisest man who ever lived got caught up in idolatry, even to the point of worshiping false gods. He was incredibly smart, very sharp. In fact, 2 Chronicles 9:4, remember when the Queen of Sheba went to visit him? She kept hearing about this guy, and she went and spoke with him. It says she was amazed. It even says she was breathless. That's what it says in 2 Chronicles 9:4. She was breathless in her admiration of Solomon, how sharp a man he was. So we're dealing with a man who's incredibly brilliant, but he became deeply involved in idolatry. So whether or not you qualify as an idolater has nothing to do with how sophisticated you are. Standing next to Solomon, all of us would look pretty backward or simple. In fact, sad to say, I've got to tell you this, 1 Kings 11 even mentions that he worshiped Baal, Asherah, Molech. If you know anything about these false gods, it might surprise you that Solomon would fall for this. And how can someone like him fall for it? That should be a red flag that idolatry can take out the best of us, especially if you think you're immune to it, that you're over it. Here in the 21st century, it makes you a perfect target. And I know people have got up like me and the possibility of modern idolatry and say, yes, I know, watch out. Don't bow to TV and don't bow down to money. Yes, I understand, those are the idols. But I think even then we think of them as figurative idols, that it's like idolatry. I think there's more to it than just bowing down to stuff. And you think about it from the perspective of the people back then. What was the attraction? Why would you want to do that? Why would you want to stop everything and get down on your knees to this object? I think we get a few answers from Aaron and those people that made the golden calf at Sinai and Jeroboam. The golden calves made God easier to get to, something tangible, something convenient. Again, there are those who worship images today that we would think of as idolatry, and I think part of it is this idea: is you have your God, your little g God, in a certain part of the house, and when you need him, when you want to deal with him, you go to him because he's convenient. He's in your house, or maybe in a local shrine or something like that. When you're done needing him, you can go away from him. He's convenient. An image captured God, and it made him small and convenient, completely knowable. In Deuteronomy, God emphasizes, he says, you only heard a voice. That's all I gave you, was a voice. You didn't see anything. He was somewhat mysterious, and that was the point. God has given us information we need, and I know you've probably felt frustrated at certain points. You have all the information you need to accept the gift of salvation. We know what we need to know in order to get to heaven, but there's a lot we don't know. I know there's questions that come up, whether because of Bible class or in your own daily Bible reading, and we have to say, I don't know. There's a great deal of information that God did not give to us. There's a lot that we're going to get when we get to heaven. When it comes to certain things, there's a great lack of information, and he limited our knowledge on purpose. So to try and restrict God to some knowable, convenient image is worshiping something less than God. And I think that's why a lot of people treat him casually today, without respect or reverence in how they talk about him. Even people who claim to be devoted to him. They're worshiping a small God because they're treating him in small ways. Understanding this transcendence of God, about how unfathomable he is, that really helped Job. Job was very upset. He wanted some explanations. I don't think he was an example of justifiable anger or anything. He just had some questions. And he wanted God to be reduced to an easy to understand agenda. But that was not the answer he got. Essentially, the answer from God was, okay, Job, this is me, this is you. Any questions? And Job's response was, no, I cover my mouth. And God was not being cruel. In fact, it was very comforting to Job. God's always compassionate, but he was teaching Job something very important. I had a friend who put it this way. My friend said, I've learned two things. One, God is big. Number two, I am not big. And sometimes just that fact is all the explanation that we need. You're not dealing with a block of wood. You're not dealing with a golden calf. You're not dealing with any tiny version that you've come up with of God that you've built up in your mind over the years. Idols are attempts to make God easier to deal with, to bring him down to our level, to make him something less than what he really is, to make him convenient. Underestimating God, trying to make him fit your life and trying to make him convenient, that's idolatry. Whether you end up on your knees or not is really not the point. It's easier to do this than we might think. We try to approach God on our terms. We get religious, sure. I mean, all of us this morning, I think, would answer the affirmative, say, yes, I'm a religious person. But then we try to make the truth fit our ideas, and God ends up supporting what we do. We're not that interested in finding out what he wants from us. We just want him to endorse what we already do. It's like the people described in Philippians 3:19. This image always kind of sticks in my mind. It's Philippians 3:19, and God describes these people in a very interesting way. He's essentially saying, I'm not their God. He says their God is their appetite. Some versions say their stomach is their God. Well, that's an odd way to describe it. He says, no, we don't worship God. You worship your stomach. You worship your appetite. You basically are worshiping what you want. That's what drives your life. That's your true agenda. Not what God wants, but your will. They're not worshiping God. They're worshiping their preferences. And you see that a lot in a lot of religious movements today. Is people want to do what they want to do. And if God wants to tag along, they're okay with that. We look life over and we see what we want, and we make our religion convenient so that it doesn't get in the way. Our appetites come first. That's idolatry. God ends up having our values. What a coincidence. He likes what we like. And he approves of our way of life. And it costs us nothing. And this happens, remember I mentioned that when Moses was gone, it kind of gradually their thinking kind of veered off track. And that happens when we neglect our Bibles and we rely on our own thinking. Romans 1 describes it this way. Because there's really only two options that you have if you don't rely on the Bible. And here it is in Romans 1:21, the other option. For even though they knew God, they did not honor him as God. See, that's what we're talking about. Or give thanks. But they became futile in their speculations, and their foolish heart was darkened. If we do not take the trouble to learn God's will and to be into our Bibles, there's only one other option left to you, and that's speculation. In other words, you can guess. And good luck with that. If I'm left to my own guessing, I don't do very well. I tend to guess in the direction that benefits me and matches my preferences. It's almost as if we're left alone with just our thoughts long enough, we automatically slip into idolatry mode. Here in the 21st century, we will profess to be wise and still become fools, just like Solomon did. We won't bow to a block of wood. I doubt anybody in this room ever will. Or you won't make a golden calf. You won't make any kind of physical image. In fact, if somebody asked you or demanded of you to kneel before anything, you would probably, out of principle, defy that command. But through our speculations, we will create a false image of God in our minds if we're not careful. And that's where we bow. In our minds, he will become the convenient little g God, expecting nothing from us but what we allow. And that's not the true God. Well, here it is. The whole mess at Sinai started because they were waiting for Moses to return. They started to redesign things. They started worshiping God, but on their terms. I would like to suggest that we're in a very similar situation. We're waiting for someone too. Just like the people were waiting for Moses, we're waiting for Jesus. It's important during the wait to resist idolatry. And it's not as easy to spot as the golden calf, because it takes up residence in our heads, and that makes it even more dangerous. It'd be easy, much easier, if there was a movement suddenly to make a golden calf out in the front lawn here. It'd be easy to deal with that. Of course, you have to watch out for things that you devote your life to more than God. And watch out for things that you put your trust in more than God. Things that we put first and treasure more than God. But it's also the things that interfere with our ideas about God, things that end up trying to make him less than God. Before we sing the song, if you're not a Christian, I encourage you to be baptized. There is a God, there really is. And he sent his son to die for you. Through baptism, you can survive death just like he did. If you are a Christian, there is a God. There really is. But if you're not careful, the world will replace him with a smaller, more convenient imposter. So I would encourage you and I, all of us, to make sure every day to keep your head clear. Make sure you're not devoted to something less than God. Make sure you're devoted to the one who actually exists. Pray you'll think about this while we stand together and sing.
I must needs go home by the way of the cross. There's no other way.